On the island of Sodor, the Fat Controller is very proud of all of his engines. He likes them to be on time, hard-working, and always helping each other whenever they can to be really useful. One day, the Fat Controller was at Knapford Station when Edward puffed in with some passengers. He saw something on the flatbed in front of him. "Bust my buffers!" cried Edward. "What is it, sir?" "It's an old motorboat," replied the Fat Controller. "I found it while I was inspecting the waste dump. If I can touch it up a little bit and add a sail just in case a motor breaks down, me and Lady Hat will go for a cruise at the fishing village." "Wow!" exclaimed Edward. "That will be fun." Just then, Thomas rolled out of the shed. He was looking worried. "Good morning, Thomas," said the Fat Controller. "What's the matter?" "Well, Sheriff's been giving me a very special, replied Thomas. "Belle's broken down, so he wants me to replace her to be Sodor Island Rescue Engine. And now, the other engines will think I'm such a snitch because I'll tell them what to do." "Thomas," said the Fat Controller, "being a rescue engine is very important. You make sure that the engines are following the rules that cause them to be in grave danger." "That's right," said Edward. "Rules are important." Thomas knew that Edward and the Fat Controller were right. "I'll try," he said at last. "I'll ask my driver to help me study the rules tonight at the shed." "Good," replied the Fat Controller. "Now go and collect Annie and Clarabelle. Your passengers need to go on your branch line before you start tomorrow." "Yes, sir," chuffed Thomas eagerly, and he chuffed away, feeling much happier. "I hope Thomas understood about being a rescue engine properly," Edward thought to himself. "And Edward," replied the Fat Controller, "you must take the boat to my house first thing tomorrow morning so that me and Lady Hat can start me painting it." "Of course, sir," Edward replied. Next morning, Edward was bringing the boat to the Fat Controller's house, while elsewhere, Thomas was at Mayfreight Station, looking out for trouble. Just then, he saw Percy racing along the track. He was pulling more than 2 mail coaches. "Stop!" called Thomas, and he blew his whistle loud and long. Percy pulled up at the platform. He was going to stop at Mayfreight anyway. "Hello, Thomas," whistled Percy. Then he noticed Thomas's driver with a clipboard. He was writing something down. "What's your driver doing?" he asked. "I'm a Sodor Island Rescue Engine," huffed Thomas grandly, "and you are running too fast. You could have had a serious accident, especially when you're pulling more than 2 mail coaches, and it's a very heavy train after all as well." "You can't turn on me," cried Percy. "I'm your best friend." "Watch it," replied Thomas. "My driver can also quit you for arguing with a rescue engine." Percy was very cross. Then later, as Thomas was taking on water at the steamworks, he saw Percy coming up towards him on the same track with a flatbed. Thomas was all covered in stinky cheese from funnel to footplate. "Bust my buffers!" cried Thomas. "What's that for?" "For you! All rats eat cheese!" puffed Percy crossly, as he set off. Victor saw everything. "What was that all about, Thomas, my friend?" he asked. "Percy's cross with me because I turned on him," said Thomas. "He was speeding down the track and pulling more than 2 mail coaches. So that's why Percy was sulking in the shed," replied Victor. "Well," he added, "looks like you have to be careful coming out of here." "Yeah," sighed Thomas. "Does that mean I've won that battle with Percy?" No, I'm afraid you've lost, my friend," said Victor. "Oh, bother," said Thomas sarcastically. Later that day, after Thomas had been cleared up, he puffed into the Blue Mountain quarry to pick up some slate and take them to Brendam Docks. Rusty, Menaeus and Skarloey were there helping Owen. As Thomas's trucks were being loaded, Skarloey spoke to Thomas.
Percy came through this afternoon and told us all about you, Thomas. He didn't look happy at all.
Thomas sighed crossly. "Let me guess, you're all on his side, aren't you?" he huffed. "No," said Menaeus. "The Fat Contoller was with him as well. He said he was a little pleased with your work so far." "Really?" asked Thomas. "Of course," called Musty from above. "Look, being a rescue engine isn't that easy. I do that help all the time on the narrow gauge railway." "Thanks for the advice," said Thomas. He coupled up to the trucks and pulled away. "I wonder if he would really give me a ticket," Rusty said to Skarloey and Menaeus. Later, Thomas puffed into the quarry. It was busy. Then Thomas saw Mavis. She was loading her trucks under the hopper. "Mavis," he said, "I've got to talk to you about something." "Can't it wait?" asked Mavis. "I'm awfully busy shunting these trucks." "I just saw Toby taking the last load of the day," replied Thomas. "So?" asked Mavis. "It was supposed to be your turn tonight." "What business is that of yours?" huffed Mavis. "The Fat Controller is not to go pushing work on the other engines," replied Thomas, "and you're breaking the rule. I'm turning you in to the Fat Controller." "I have a very good reason for not taking the last load," growled Mavis crossly. "And I have a very good reason for reporting you," huffed Thomas. "You broke the rule. Goodbye." Mavis was left speechless. Late that night, all the engines were resting at Titmouth sheds. Except Thomas. He was keeping a lookout for any more trouble. Just then, Gorton crawled onto the turntable. He had just finished pulling the night express. Thomas blew his whistle loud and long again. It woke all the other engines up. They were surprised and very cross. "What was that for?" huffed Gorton as he puffed into the berth next to Thomas. "You're 5 minutes late, Gorton," Thomas said sternly. "You were supposed to be back at 11:30. And look, it's 11:35. Then suddenly, the clock made a strange ticking sound. "Ugh, honestly, Peter should really get that clock fixed," sighed Thomas. "I have a very good reason for being late," huffed Gorton. "That's what they all say," replied Thomas, and went to sleep. How they could cramp 50 feet of nerve in a 40-feet steam engine, Gorton said to himself. The other engines agreed. They were now starting to get very cross with Thomas. The next morning, the Fat Controller, Lady Hatt and Edward were busy putting the finishing touches on the boat. "I originally thought a canoe should have funky colours," said Edward, "but red and black still works too." "Good thing you're not on Thomas's report list then," said the Fat Controller. "I know," replied Edward. "He punished Percy, Mavis and Gorton very hard. I think he's taking his job too seriously." The Fat Controller sighed. "I'll have a word with him later." The Fat Controller just hammered the last nail into place. "Well, it's finished." Edward gasped. "Trembling traps! It looks great, sir!" The boat looked splendid. It was a beautiful black with red lining with the words SS Hatt on its deck. "I know it's got a new motor already, but I'm still going to add the sail to it as well, just in case it breaks down." Maybe all of the engines could come with us to the fishing village and launch the boat. What a good idea, sir, replied Edward. He was very excited. But then, suddenly, his excitement turned to worry. If that rescue engine comes along, he sighed. He was wondering how he could snap Thomas out of it when his thoughts were rudely interrupted. Suddenly, there was a siren sound. Red and Sheriff raced past. "Sheriff, what's up?" cried the Fat Controller. "There's an emergency," cried Sheriff. "An old warehouse is on fire." The Fat Controller gasped. "My mother is working her dog there. Oh, I hope they're all right." But at the warehouse, she wasn't all right. She was worried. Thomas and Percy puffed up to the warehouse. They are on their way back from shunting trucks. "What's going on here?" asked Percy. "And what's the matter, Mom?" asked Thomas. "Gremlin, my Dalmatian," began Dowager Hatt, "wandered into this warehouse as it caught fire, and it's gonna fall to bits. He can't get out. You've got to help me, please, Thomas." "You're on..." "Yes," said Sheriff. "You're on the same track as the warehouse. You go and get him." "I can't go inside," protested Thomas. "I'll break the rules. Why can't Flynn go?" "I'm sorry, Thomas, I can't," cried Flynn. "I'm needed to put out the rest of this fire." "Please, Thomas," Dowager Hatt pleaded. "He's my dog." Thomas didn't know what to do. He could tell that Dowager Hatt was worried for her dog, so he made a decision. "Okay, I'm going in," he said. Puff by puff, Thomas puffed into the old warehouse. It was smoky and fiery as well. Thomas coughed. Then suddenly, an old piece of roof fell right in front of Thomas. Thomas was shocked. He was starting to feel scared. He wanted to come out, but he couldn't. He promised Dowager Hatt to rescue Gremlin. Must be brave, he chanted. Thomas continued forward. Outside, Percy and Dowager Hatt were starting to worry for Thomas and Gremlin. Thomas soon found Gremlin. "Ah, there you are, Gremlin. In you get," he said. So Gremlin did as Thomas had told him. "Right, easy does it." He carefully reversed out of the warehouse just as the fire fizzled out. Percy and Dowager Hatt were relieved. "Oh, thank goodness, Thomas, you're safe," puffed Percy. Dowager Hatt was delighted to have Gremlin back. "Oh, Gremlin, I was so worried." "Thank you, Thomas. I can't thank you enough." "Yeah, Thomas, you did it," Percy whistled. He was very proud of his best friend. Thomas smiled too, until he noticed his paintwork. He was all covered in dust from a burning warehouse. "You're welcome, Mom. But now I must hurry. I need to get clean before the Fat Controller sees me. He's gonna hate me for this." And he puffed to the engine wash. Soon Thomas was as clean as a whistle. "Ah, that's better," he said. "Now a Fat Controller won't know how I got dirty at the warehouse," he said. Thomas felt very pleased with himself, but he didn't know that a soap from the engine wash had squirted onto the tracks in front of him. As Thomas put forward, he slipped on the slippery rails. Luckily, no one was hurt, but Thomas was in a terrible mess again. He had bumped into 2 tar wagons and was black from smoke box to cab. Luckily, he was more dirty than hurt. And to make matters worse, there stood a Fat Controller. He had just arrived on board Percy. He looked very cross. "What's happened here?" "I had a wash, sir," said Thomas sadly, but the tracks were slippery and I bumped into the tar wagons. Looks like now I'm one that's going to be punished. No, Thomas, said the Fat Controller. You did made a mess in the yard and told off Percy, Mavis and Gorton. Yes, added Percy. I know, I'm not finished yet, Percy. But you've also saved my mother's dog's life. But you are still being punished by removing you from rescue engine duty. Besides, Belle's coming back tomorrow, so you can go back to your usual jobs. Thank you, sir, said Thomas, feeling very relieved. But hang on, Thomas added. I thought you were pleased with me yesterday. Why am I being punished for telling engines off? Well, it's because I'm not pleased with you being bossy to the engines, said the Fat Controller. Rescue engines isn't about bossing engines about, it's about helping them out of danger. Thomas felt very silly indeed. Percy, I'm sorry for reporting on you yesterday. That's okay, Thomas, and I'm sorry too. I won't cover you with cheese again. That's a deal, replied Thomas. Now that that's all sorted out, why don't you two help me take my boat to the fishing village tomorrow, added the Fat Controller. It would be a real pleasure to do it, tooted Percy. Oh, sir, tooted Thomas happily.